I think most of the world has forgotten that Idaho even has mountains. I hike on them on a regular basis. I don't bring any partner other than my dog. Between the two of us, we do just fine. Every once in a while, I get up the gumption to push myself to go just a little bit further, to climb a bit higher. On one occasion, I approached one of the more isolated peaks. You'd be surprised at how still the air can be up there. And it was in that stillness that I heard a deep growl. At first, I thought it would come from my dog, but I felt his leash tense up when I looked up at him. He did not look like a dog that had just been growling. His eyes were wide open, and his head was turned so that he could just stare at something right behind me. When I turned around, I saw a creature that was just about as tall as me, standing there staring right back at me. My very first instinct was to grab my phone, but after seeing the creature's face looking down at me from over 7 feet in height, instantly dropped my phone on accident. I was impressed not only by the creature's height, but also how slender it appeared. It didn't look like it had much more to do it than the skin that was wrapped around its bones. Its long legs somehow reminded me of a chilling photo of the Holocaust, where I had seen bodies that were thrown into mass graves. Legs like long skeletons, just like this creature's were. Only this thing was much taller. It had 2 small dark eyes. Had there been any more eyes on its head, it might have reminded me of a spider. It had a large toothy grin, and it took me a moment to realize that it wasn't smiling at me. It just didn't have any lips to fall down over its mouth. So it swayed back and forth like a praying mantis, trying to gauge a jump. The head kept tilting side to side. I couldn't tell if it was trying to display an emotion like confusion, if that was just a part of the way the thing ticked. I was so torn between terror and fascination. I ended up standing there for a long time. My dog was the first to break the spell that had been cast on us. Without taking my eyes off the monster, I bowed down and picked up my phone, which had now been thoroughly cracked. My fear grew at the realization I wouldn't be able to call out at any point. Even if the phone still worked, the display was beyond legibility. That's when I noticed that the more I stared at this thing, the more I wanted to sink into a trance-like state. My instincts told me that it wasn't a good idea to return to that state. So, I began to pick my way back down the mountainside. The thing followed us. It didn't act like it was going to spring on us. In fact, it was more like it wanted us to look at it again. I had no way of knowing for sure, but I expect that if I were to become focused on it again, that's when it would attack. Surely, it was interested in more than just attention. I kept the monster in my periphery, not completely taking my eyes off it, nor looking at it directly as we made our way down the mountainside. It didn't seem like it had been that long of a climb, but in my heightened state, it felt like it took an excruciatingly long time to find our way back down. Eventually, the creature departed, but it kept its eyes transfixed on us the entire time. I don't know what it was, what it wanted. I'm glad that I never found out. I hated hiking as a teenager. I was more the type that enjoyed playing video games and reading books, although my parents insisted that I needed to get out of the house and look at the real world around me while it was still summer. Well, I didn't just like looking at things. I wanted things that made my brain work. Hiking just wasn't one of them. My mother would hike all day and night, and if it were up to her, we'd be doing it constantly. We had just moved, and so she had gotten hooked on exploring trails all around our town. The time we lived in had lush green forest filled with tall trees, so many of them that you couldn't even see the sky from the ground level. Did I mention that she also liked a challenge? The forests were rife with thick bramble bushes that grew everywhere, and they made walking difficulty in places. And they also provided shelter for animals like raccoons and possums. I knew that they were usually harmless, but it still creeped me out at night when they would scurry about the forest floors or suddenly dart across my path. Well, one hike in the woods, it finally happened. I got separated from my mother. I had gotten absorbed in my thoughts, and I was daydreaming, not paying attention to where she was. Her? She probably got distracted by some rare butterfly or something. Stopped paying attention to where I was. And I just happened around nightfall, the time of day when the forest creeps me out the most. I tried calling out for my mother. Of course, she didn't answer me. I imagine that we're miles apart by the time either one of us would notice we had gotten separated. So, I tried doing my best to pick my way back home in the dark. It was a little bit of light left, but it was just enough to be an insult, as I couldn't see much at all. I stood still for a long moment, trying to collect my thoughts and get my bearings. That's when I heard a twig snap. The instant that I turned around to look and see where the sound came from, I see this huge blur of movement. Everything was a shadow at that level of light, and I swear it looked like a giant shrub had moved very quickly. It was almost like a bad special effect in a cartoon when a character suddenly takes off. I called for Mom a second time, but no answer. A rather large raccoon ran across my path. It wasn't just the sudden appearance of the animal. It was how quickly it was moving. I know there was another, and another. They were running from something, and it slowly dawned on me that the forest was just a little too quiet. The forest is supposed to be full of sounds of night creatures as they wake up, come to life to hunt. But there was much sound at all. I became aware of a slight buzzing noise that I had first mistook for cicadas. But this buzzing sounded more like something's breathing. I know that statement is confusing, but if every time you inhaled and exhaled, there was a buzz in your lungs, that's kind of what this sounded like. My fear was now becoming very difficult to manage, so I called out another time. Mom, is that you? The question hung in the unnatural quiet of the air for a long time. I got an answer back from the darkness. It didn't quite sound like my mother's voice. It sounded like mine. My own voice repeated the same question back to me. Mom, is that you? Except my voice was distorted and unnatural, with that strange buzzing noise mixed into it. I picked a direction and began walking, a quick clip. I could hear light footsteps trolling in the darkness nearby. Almost mechanically, that strange imitation of my voice sounded again, and the longer I ignored it, the more it spoke. Same words, same inflection, same cadence, everything. It was like some sort of demonic parrot. Miraculously enough, I wandered my way back onto a main trail that I was fortunate enough to recognize. From there, I was able to run back to the start of the trail. And there was something about finally knowing where I was that allowed for the panic to fully set in. I found our car and got in. Mom found her way back. She looked at me like she wondered why on earth I would be in the car waiting for her. As I was trying to tell her what had happened, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a tall and slender shadow at a distance. It looked like some part of a humanoid figure, but when I completely focused on it, it became part of one of the trees. My name is Charles. I've been living in the Bay Area now for quite some time. I've grown used to hearing howling noises during my walks through the woods. The first time this happened to me was just about 4 months ago. Since the whole pandemic, I've been making it a goal to spend as much time outside as possible, since my old job had me desk logged so much. I heard a very loud noise coming from the woods near the trail that I was walking on. It scared me so much, I nearly fell over. And not long after that, though, these sort of animal calls became a normal thing for me to hear when hiking at night with my wife. It always sounded like more than one animal, but they also sound far away from us as well. My wife and I got separated. I was mad, and for sure, I had seen her between the trees. I got closer to see that my night vision had made a huge blunder. This wasn't my wife. This was an oversized wolf, looking both majestic and offended at my very presence. I started to back up, remembering everything that I'd ever learned about how to handle encounters with wild animals. And I forgot everything when this creature stood up on its hind legs and stayed that way. I could then see that it had knees and elbows and hands. The fear was like a bolt of lightning that had blasted all else out of my head. I ran, never once looking back. I nearly knocked my wife over as I went past her. She caught up with me, told me that I looked like I had seen a ghost. I couldn't speak whole sentences for, a long time. We got home, and I told her my tale then. I'm not sure if she believes me or not, so that's why I'm sharing it with you guys. I was staying at my dad's place for the weekend here in Omaha, Nebraska. It was a school night, and I was ready to go home around 6:30 p.m. I was walking out of the house with my father, talking about him watching me play football on fall weekends. So we were conversing a long time when he said he's going to drop me off at the gas station that is located by our house. We bowled into this gas station car wash so I can get some popcorn before heading home. My girlfriend and I walk inside of the gas station, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, she was with us. This is where she looked through magazines while I purchased a couple bags of popcorns and a drink. We walked back outside. My dad was gone. His car remained confused. I went back inside the station and checked the bathroom, but he wasn't there. At first, I wasn't too worried, since we were in a well-lit area. The more we wandering around, though, looking for my dad, the more anxious I grew. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of his sweater, next to some trees in a thicket. It looked like he was talking to somebody very tall. I studied him for any sign of a defensive stance, like he was being mugged, but he was standing as straight as an arrow. I tentatively moved to join the conversation. The stranger, seemingly draped in shadows, sped off through the trees at an impossible speed. Dad stood still. I could then see that his eyes were so wide open, tears ran down from them. He smited large and full. It was a troubling sight. He wouldn't even respond to me talking to him, or me waving my hand in front of him. I called an ambulance. He snapped out of his trance eventually, around the time they showed up. He didn't remember any strange figure, and he could only tell me that an old crush from high school had said hello in passing. But he couldn't recall talking to her at length. He wondered at how his memory was missing, and I'm sure there was nothing feminine about the figure that was talking to him. We never saw it again, and Dad never remembered what it was.